Hey class, welcome to the nervous system lecture. In this portion, we will talk a bit about the background of the nervous system, but mostly it's how is the nervous system organized that we'll discuss. So jump right in. The nervous system, it actually works together with the endocrine system to control and adjust the activity of all the other systems. And the nervous system does this relatively quickly by firing these action potentials, these electrochemical signals throughout the body. Those happen fairly immediately. The endocrine system takes slower to respond. We've talked about the different ways that hormones are released, for example, by monitoring fluids or through a neural stimulation, but a lot of it is through hormonal control of hormone release. So it's this cascading effect. So it takes time to release the hormone that's going to cause the release of the other hormone that then has to circulate in the blood to reach the organ with the receptors, and very different way of controlling your body's systems, but they do work together. So for organizing the nervous system, I have this drawing that we're going to walk through pretty slowly because it is crucial to understanding everything that we do for the whole rest of the unit. So if we're going to draw the nervous system organization, I'm just taking screenshots from an old drawing, but we would start by thinking about the brain and spinal cord. Most people know the nervous system contains these two objects, and they do make up the entirety of the central nervous system. They're responsible for integrating and processing information. So, what I mean by that is when information arrives, let's say from your eye on the photoreceptors on the back of your retina, that information comes in, but it needs to be processed, meaning you might know that the information crosses to the other side of your brain, of your head, and it's upside down, and the brain needs to kind of make sense of that, flip it around. But also, it will integrate that information with other parts of your brain. So, usually, I pick someone in the class and I say, okay, so here's so and so, and I can see what? I see a kind of a dark blob and then like these shapes and kind of round things here and a triangle here, and that's what the photoreceptors tell my brain, but that's not going to do me any good. I want to know, like, who is this person based on these features? Do I know them? Do I like them? Do I need to tell them something? Oh, I remember that they didn't take the test. Am I scared of them? Are they acting socially normal? Like their facial expression, does it show interest or boredom or frustration? So all of that relies on this integration piece of the central nervous system. That's kind of where I think all the interesting stuff is in integration. Everything else that we're going to do on this drawing is the peripheral nervous system. So yeah, get ready to learn a lot about the peripheral nervous system. See these lines here, they're kind of indicating, okay, everything down here will draw as the PNS. Starting with the fact that if the brain and spinal cord are going to integrate and process information, information must arrive at the CNS. So the nerves that carry sensory information that arrives at the CNS are afferent or afferent nerves. Information arriving starts with A. Often, maybe not always, but often the CNS will decide to have some response based on this sensation that's arriving. So when there's an effect that happens, these efferent or efferent nerves send out motor commands. Let's do a real quick, obvious example. If the sensation that's arriving on these afferent, arriving nerves is that you've just touched a hot stove, the efferent nerves will send a command to your skeletal muscle to pull your hand back before it gets severely burned. So sensations arrive, motor commands exit. Of course, there are many different types of sensations. For example, special senses. Special senses is those are anything where there's uh, a unique like instrument or organ to capture this sensory information. Meaning the eye is the only thing that captures sight, captures visual information. Only the tongue does taste. Only the nose does smell. Only the ear does hearing, as well as in the inner ear is balance. So these all have a special mechanism or organ that captures the sensation. So those are all special senses. So all that information arrives at the CNS through these afferent nerves. What about touch, though? What about touching the hot stove and pulling away? Well, right here's my little drawing of touch. That is a somatic sense. You may recall soma means, anyone, means body. Like the soma is going to be the cell body of the neuron. So soma means body. So these somatic senses come more like from the body, not these special parts of the body like the eye. So touch, this lightning bolt into a sad face is pain. There's temperature. And even here with these arrows pointing to a muscle and to the elbow joint, here we're talking about like how much are your muscles currently contracted, or what position are your joints in. That information actually arrives at your central nervous system constantly. And in fact, if you were to, I don't know, be floating in space or something with your eyes closed, you would still know if your arms, you had flexed your elbow, or if your elbows were fully extended. You could tell that because that information goes to your brain. So what's left? We did all these special organs. We did, quote unquote, the rest of the body, but we didn't get into any of those internal organs. The heart, the lungs, uterus, and penis for reproduction. Here's a stomach with some intestines. So these are all visceral senses because your viscera are your organs. You might recall that from the visceral layer of the serous membrane from Unit 1. You might know about it from Jurassic Park, the first movie, when they talk about raptors eviscerating someone. So removal of the organs is evisceration. So anytime you see viscera or a visceral response, it's like something from deep within you, that means organs. So that's all the sensory information that will arrive through these nerves into the CNS. Now let's talk more about what might your brain and spinal cord decide to do with that information. It might decide to have some somatic response. Now you see we're reusing this word somatic, and in fact, we could make a whole new chart that group this stuff a little bit differently and kind of smush these two somatic areas together. But let's just think about this as a motor response in which muscles are controlled. Skeletal muscle, specifically. So this would be the hand pulling off the stove. You could say this could even be like, okay, your body temperature is starting to drop. So you just use your skeletal muscle to go get a sweater. This doesn't have to be all reflex actions. But what about the other types of muscle? Well, our final chapter here is that the CNS can also have some kind of motor or efferent response, not just through skeletal muscle, but through two other divisions, which are autonomically controlled. When you see auto, that means self. Automatic is like a self-shifting car, right? Automatic, whatever. So this is basically, it doesn't mean it's automatic, but make sure you say autonomic, spell autonomic. But these are these automatic responses. It's not voluntarily controlled. It's all involuntary. And you have two divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic, you've probably heard of before because you've likely heard of the fight or flight response. We'll talk more about this later. We have a whole chapter on the autonomic nervous system. But for now, we'll just simplify it. Let's say you are in the fight or flight of your life, right? Like people always say, like getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger. To think about how this ANS evolved. So you're getting chased by the saber-toothed tiger. What kind of things do you not want going on at that moment? You don't want like an erection or sperm being made or planning your next ovulation. You don't want to be worried about digestion or the rate of blood filtration that's happening in your kidneys. So this kind of stuff you're going to shut down. But you'll increase things like respiration rate. So you start to breathe faster. You need more oxygen because oxygen helps make the skeletal muscle do its thing. You need skeletal muscle to either fight or run away. But if you have more oxygen, you also have to get it to your cells. So you'll increase your heart rate. Your heart rate will go up, your heart will beat faster to help move this oxygenated blood to where it needs to get. Your basal metabolic rate will increase. You need these cells to take this oxygen that's being moved through your blood to these organs and like grab the oxygen out of there, use it to convert glucose into ATP. The ATP will power your skeletal muscle. It's all kind of the same goal here. And there's other stuff that needs to happen, like release sugar into the bloodstream. If you want to make ATP, mostly we've talked about getting oxygen, but you also need that sugar. So the liver will release sugar into the bloodstream. So those are mostly related, everything we talked about there, but also your pupils will dilate. You want to be able to maybe see a tiny bit better in that moment that you're fighting or fleeing. You will sweat. Your erector pili muscles will stand up. Blood will be redirected from more superficial areas like in your skin to the organs that need it, mostly like heart and diaphragm and your skeletal muscle. So we could go on, and we will during ANS chapter, the autonomic nervous system. But for now, just kind of pick a few of these that make sense to you and start to use those to understand what the sympathetic portion of the autonomic messages are. And then last, there is a parasympathetic portion of the nervous system. These are these efferent responses that are doing usually the opposite of everything we just said. So who's going to tell your heart to slow back down, your respiration rate to decrease, your BMR to go back to normal? Who's going to tell your sweat glands to stop making so much sweat, your erector pili to chill out, and your pupils to go back to normal? All that stuff is going to be signaled through the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called the rest and digest branch or feed and breed, all just like cutesy little sayings to try to help remember the major functions of this branch of the nervous system. The one last thing I want to say is that all these portions or divisions or subdivisions or segments or categories, none of those words really matter. What matters is things like autonomic, somatic, special senses, visceral senses. Whether you want to say the visceral senses are a branch of the afferent division, or they're a section or a chunk or a category or a subdivision, doesn't matter. Yeah. So you might hear me use those interchangeably at times, but don't worry about using that specific terminology. Just know, these are all related to each other, and keep in mind that often the simplest way to do this is just say all of this is the sympathetic nervous system. This is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system includes this. Sensory system includes all of this. So there's lots of different words out there to kind of capture your meaning. And as we practice this, it will become more clear. So next, we'll jump into the neural tissue and start to look at neurons and glial cells. See you then.